So,
Wow.
moving on to the mode.
Hey!
DM by DM.
DM. Oh, I never noticed that. Wow. Insight.
Yeah, it takes somebody as kind of anal as me to realise that obviousness.
Peter falls off his chair. Yeah, you clear your Delta Machine. Depeche Mode, Delta Machine.
What album is this?
This is the...
Yep, I thought so, yeah. First in the years since Sound of the Universe.
Sound of the Universe. 4 years, I can't...
The previous one, that's 2009, wasn't it?
Yeah.
This is interesting, I suppose because... interesting, I guess, because all the talk around it, at least when it's coming out, I think the band were as guilty as anybody in this, was the kind of perceived desire from fans and the band to try and recapture some of that kind of Violator songs of faith and devotion kind of vibe feeling from the early 90s essentially. And I suppose the question is A, whether they succeeded, and B, if they did succeed, whether or not it's a good thing or not. And I kind of think it's a mixture of yes and no on both counts really. There's no doubting that this is a good album. First of all, I should say that, and I think it's a better album than the previous album.
Yeah. Entirely agree.
Yeah, and it
wholeheartedly.
Kicks off brilliantly. You've got Welcome to My World and the Nick Cave-ish Angel that start off the album, which I think are both brilliant tracks.
Yeah.
Still for me less said about Heaven.
Heaven is
the better because I still just can't listen to it without just thinking Sour Times.
Yeah.
By Portishead and
it sits better here.
It works better in the context of the album.
Yes,
I agree with that.
Yeah,
but it still kind of brings down what had been a really strong start to the album into a kind of.
I can't understand why they didn't push Angel out first, but
no, yes, I agree. Which it's a much better track. Elsewhere on the album, you've got a couple of kind of, particularly if you're going back to that whole kind of. Feel of Violator songs and faith and devotion. You've got that typical kind of Martin Gore kind of musical guitar riff thing going on, so on, slow and goodbye. And again, I was also thinking kind of Delta blues riff as well. Thinking maybe that was the thinking behind the thing of that. So you got that. You've got some great sing-along pop. I'm thinking "Soothe My Soul" in particular. You've got some classic DM in kind of broken soft touch raw nerve, and you've got some other interesting stuff like kind of Should Be Higher and Alone, which are also good.
Oh, very good.
But there's something, I don't know, for me there's still something missing from it to make it really kind of gel for me. And
Alan Wilder.
Perhaps. And it more so when I decided to go back and listen to some. I mean, I suppose this is one of the things that interested me about this particular thing, since we're both Depeche Mode fans. So it meant I was going back to listening to some.
Yeah. Spoiler alert.
Yeah. Other stuff. And we've had part of this conversation previously.
Yeah.
But Playing the Angel. So I went back to both Playing the Angel and even back to 2001's Exciter albums, and. For a start off, Playing the Angel, which came out
2005,
is a much better album.
Playing the Angel, it for me remains their standout album since the mid-90s, and like Delta Machine was a much more of a solid. Much more of a well-crafted, continuous. Album with a theme that ran through it, with something that pulled it together. My problem with Sounds of the Universe, which followed it, was an okay album. It has some great material on it, but it did it kind of fell apart from, and then you start to listen, you re-listen to it and you think, well, actually that's not. And anyway, let's not go into that, but that was sort of a few loose hanging threads, whereas I think Playing the Angel and this particularly, everything just sort of pulls together. I mean, in terms of this album, in relation to the last two, they've all been produced by Ben Hillier, who's worked with Elbow in the past, and Blur as well. But this is very much the Ben Hillier. This is the close of the Ben Hillier trilogy, and it very much feeds back into Playing the Angel. It sort of closes the circle in terms of the themes. Again, we're talking about angels. Again, we're talking about universes. This is going to be the Angel Universe trilogy. This is going to be that Berlin Part 2 at some point. So it does that. But the surprise for me on this album, more so than the previous two, is Dave Gahan's lyrical writing.
Yes.
Dave Gahan's tracks on here, surprisingly, are some of the stronger tracks.
I would agree with that, definitely. I mentioned them, Broken and should be higher.
Should be higher, but even Secret to the End, which cheekily steals a riff from one of the Ultra period tracks, is a really strong track. Sort of after the sort of slight dampening of Heaven, sort of brings it back up again. And I do agree to that. Well, you're sort of alluding to the Violator Songs of Faith debate that's been happening in the run up to this album coming out. I disagree with that. I actually think it delves a little bit deeper, and we're back to music for the masses. And in fact, in some of the tracks, and certainly on side 2, there's even a touch of an updated Speak and Spell about it. And again, when we talk about collaborations, Dave Gahan's obviously benefited from his work with Soul Savers the last year or so in terms of his lyrical writing. Martin Gore has benefited from his collaboration with Vince Clarke. There's a couple of tracks in here where there are what sound like a couple of discarded VCMG riffs that have been pulled together, dusted off, and put into something with lyrics, which but not in a way that sounds recycled, but actually just taking a little piece of something there and building it into something else.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, but I would still prefer there to have been kind of a bit more of that. I mean, for me, like I said, it sounds like I'm criticising an album that I actually think is quite good, but I suppose it's because
likewise.
But I suppose it's because you have kind of expectations like anything else, and you get disappointed by bands. Well, especially that class thing, you get disappointed bands if don't do anything new, and then if they do something new, then you get. But for me, this album, the problem with this album for me, and the last album to a certain extent, was it just sounds like, to a degree, like a band not taking chances. For a band that evolved as they did, and as their sound evolved through the 80s and through the 90s, it seems perhaps a shame, and perhaps I'm being too overcritical, that the kind of evolution, risk-taking seems to have ended perhaps with whatchamacallit, the other album which we talked about a minute ago.
Exciter?
Yes, Exciter.
Right, okay.
Exciter, which is I think probably their most difficult album to listen to. In the fact that it's not full of immediate songs. It's almost a kind of ballad album. Yeah, really.
I listened to it again recently, and I entirely agree.
But I actually think it's their most interesting album since the 90s, because it is the most challenging. It's not kind of except for first track,
Dream On,
which is just a brilliant piece of just brilliant. But it's not. But actually, it's weird because it's totally unreflective of the rest of the record. But I think that album is just things like is it When Body Speaks or When Body Speaks?
When the Body Speaks, the sort of very that's very Violator, that track, actually.
The Sweetest Condition and stuff like that. It's just really kind of oppressive, introverted kind of stuff, but so typical DM, but trying to be slightly different. And I would have liked something not the same as that, because that's you want something different. But I'd have preferred a bit more, a bit more interest.
All right, okay. I disagree in part, because I actually think this is. I actually think this album sounds like it could be recorded by anyone in 2013. I mean that as a compliment. It sounds fresh. It doesn't sound like Depeche Mode's greatest hits reheated. I think they are pushing for something original in part. Okay, exclude Angel from what I just said, because that is a classic Songs of Faith pulling together of gospel and blues and Depeche Mode from that era. But in other parts of the album, I think they are...
Just Touch Raw Nerve could have been on any early Depeche Mode album.
I suppose it could. My other disappointment, if we're going to talk about disappointments, is Martin Gore's vocal track on here as well. The Child Inside, which... Yeah. I think. Can
we just say it's shy to move on?
Well, it sounds like the track he's recorded on the last 3 or 4 albums, and that's harsh. It sounds harsher than I mean it to be, but it's true. But I think other than those sort of 2 points, and Angel, of course, I love. I think it's a really good Depeche Mode album. I think it's one of their greats, and I completely appreciate where you're coming from in terms of Exciter. And in terms of doing something different, I think this does do something different.
Oh my god!
I think that's the first time we've disagreed about an album we both actually really like.
It is a unique position, isn't it? It is the unique position thinking, yes, we're both saying this is a great album, and disagreeing on it. Yeah.